put your eyes down on the rear shock of this bike and you will see the Fox Live Valve Neo completely wireless electronic rear shock. Blake's been testing it now for quite a few months actually. You might have seen some of our first impression stuff on this, but in this video we're going to go for a deep dive into how this shock works and of course the rest of the shocks in the range. So start off, Blake, give us a bit of an overview about what the rear shock is and what you kind of get when you get the setup.
Yeah, so basically out of the box, I received the DHX version, so the coil version. It also comes as a Float X, so you know your air over oil version. But basically straight out of the box, obviously we've got coil shock. You can get it with a range of different spring weights, that kind of thing. And then we've got these two little sensors that mount up on the brake caliper bolts. And basically, as far as the bike goes, that is it. Obviously, we've got a battery and a battery charger out of the box as well. So we've got that all juiced up and then bolted it up to the bike. Basically, you do a calibration through the app. So there's a brand new app to go along with the Neo ecosystem, I guess you could say. And yeah, actually the setup was pretty bloody simple. So
Blake's just touched on it right there. The Live Valve from Fox previous generations is worlds different to this. Obviously the main things are, of course, there's a heap of cables and whatnot. It was all wired, the last stuff, and the fork was a part of it. This new Neo, the air and the coil, it's just the rear shock. Fox sort of discovered across the Live Valve journey that the fork really doesn't need to be locked out, and it kind of adds a sort of layer of complexity and really takes away, detracts from the ride experience. But also, one of the really cool things about this Live Valve Neo is that you get the shock and you can put it on any bike you want, whereas the Live Valve of past, it had to be the whole bike, so you were really limited to the makes and models of bike that you could get, and it really made accessibility of the unit quite small, and that really kind of limited essentially the amount of people that were even going to experience it. So maybe, it's not to say it wasn't successful, but it was certainly really held back in terms of the people that could kind of get it and use it. Whereas this guy, if you've got a trail bike, you can pretty much get a shock that's going to fit. And now, I just touched on a really good point. Fox have really designed this around trail riders as opposed to XC and downhill. Can you talk a little bit about that? Yeah, so basically, like from a hands-free point of view, I guess you could say, you know, everything that's happening within trail riding, like, you know, this is a 140, 150 mil bike, but you know, you can bump up the travel, lower the travel a little bit. Everything's coming at you so fast in comparison to maybe, you know, a cross-country bike with manual lockouts, or even we're seeing downhill bikes these days with manual lockouts. Obviously you can get wireless in that as well, but everything's coming at you so quickly, and in order to actually make the benefit of, you know, whether it's a full lockout or if you're just looking to stiffen up the rear suspension, you probably don't actually have enough time to react and hit a button, or you fumble through the button, something like that. So having, you know, this automatic system take the thinking out of it for you and actually getting the benefits of whether it's a pedal platform or a lockout or just stiffening it up a little bit, it's actually getting a lot more use out of it for sure. That makes a ton of sense. And I guess to really dumb it back to the kind of lowest common denominator, the reason that Fox have even developed this shock is it's about pedaling efficiency and getting like the most efficiency out of the bike possible. And so that means essentially firming up the rear shock or locking out the rear shock for when you're pedaling or when you're on a smooth bit of trail, but then as soon as the trail gets bumpy or as soon as you're descending, it just comes to life. Now, another interesting thing about the like this version of the Neo Live Valve is that it doesn't rely on a heap of different sensors like in the bottom bracket or up on, like we mentioned, on the fork or anything like that. It's a lot more, I guess, simplistic in its sort of its setup, but it's actually a lot more advanced as well. So tell us a bit about how the system comes to life, operates, and how when you're on a trail, it senses when to be open, when to be closed, etc.
Yeah, so essentially, like we mentioned, we've just got our two little sensors which mount underneath the brake caliper bolts. This doesn't interfere with brake performance or setup or anything like that. You know, they might look, to me, to be honest, they did initially look a little bit vulnerable kind of thing, but I haven't noticed, I haven't clipped my foot on the rear one at all. You know, obviously it's kind of tucked away behind the fork there. So other than, you know, visually you see them, there's no effect on the bike at all.
And they're pretty lightweight, aren't they?
Yeah, like to be honest, like the whole added weight of the system is so negligible for the performance increases that you get.
And the reason, am I right in thinking the reason they're on the brakes has got nothing to do with the braking? It's not when you're on the brakes the system operates. It's got nothing to do with that at all. They just wanted to get the sensor as close to the axle as possible.
Yep.
And this is the most efficient way you could do it across all makes and models. Doesn't matter what brakes you're running, sensors are going to mount. So again, it's getting back to, you can set the system up on whatever bike you're running, right?
Exactly right. There's no interference. You know, there's I'm sure Fox have done their due diligence and made sure that, you know, on the rear of the frame, across every make and model, there's no interference with the frame itself. Obviously the fork is the fork. Like there's only a handful of fork manufacturers. It's very easy to, you know, confirm that that's not going to interfere with anything, you know, across your different rotor sizes and whatnot. And yeah, like I said, basically they needed to get these sensors at or as close to each axle as possible. And that is basically to ensure that when you're doing the pitch of the bike, whether it's climbing or descending, anything like that, and that comes back to the calibration, the setup. You need to set it up on a level piece of land and that kind of thing.
So like Blake's been mentioning, the connectivity, it all is essentially the way you set the system up or customize the system so that it works best for you, is through the Fox Live Valve Neo app on the phone. Tell us a bit about the app. Yeah,
so basically that was one little gripe I did have about the previous generation. I'm definitely not a...
the wide version?
The wide version, sorry, yep. I'm not, you know, super down with the tech, I guess you could say, and I did sort of fumble my way through it in the end, but the connectivity of the initial wide version to the app, I did have a few little troubles with. I got there in the end. That compared to, obviously, we're quite a few years later down the line as well, though. This one just connects straight away.
So it seems a lot more refined, user-friendly in that sense.
Yeah. And even compared to other, you know, the e-bike apps and all that sort of stuff, the new Fox connectivity for the Live Valve is just so much more simple and instantaneous, basically. Yeah.
That makes a ton of sense. We mentioned before, obviously there's an air can version, the float, should I say, and we opted for the DHXs. It's a little bit rowdier, and some of the trails we ride tend to be a bit more on that edge. We've got it fitted to a Giant Trans X. Now this bike came stock obviously without the Live Valve. So can you tell us a bit about, like, from having ridden the bike with a regular kind of always active shock to this, what were some of the things you noticed different when you first few rides on the Live Valve Neo?
It's obviously so much more efficient. And that was, you know, it's obviously already a very efficient bike. It's a lightweight 140, 150 mil trail bike, which, you know, you probably, unless you were going to be bending down and, you know, putting it into a pedal platform, you probably wouldn't put a coil shock in it. But with the Live Valve Neo, you get the best of both worlds. You can have coil shock performance on the descents and have realistically better than air pedaling performance on the way back up.
Definitely, and obviously one of the characteristics that we all love about coil is it's so active. But not only is it active like in terms of making the ride smoother, but it's giving you more grip because it's keeping the rear wheel more planted on the trail. So, but obviously the downside is that because it's so active, you know, it sucks a lot of the power out of your legs, you know, when you're ascending. So really best of both worlds.
Exactly right.
Let me ask you a question. Going back to how you rode the bike in its stock version with a regular active rear shock versus the Neo, would you say the Live Valve Neo adds performance and or, you know, boosts the overall performance of the bike?
100%, and that's not just in descending, it's in the climbing as well. So basically within the app, as well as a manual adjustment on the shock, you can control how locked out, for lack of a better term, or how much pedal platform, for example, you have. You can literally have the thing completely locked out if that's what you want in its closed state. So you can literally be riding around on a hardtail until you start pointing it downhill. So it can really, you know, depending on how you like to set it up, how far you want to go down that rabbit hole of playing around with those different options, you can sort of have two different bikes by adding in the Live Valve Neo.
That's interesting. And we know a lot of people put comments, a lot of people send into the magazine. They really like customizing their bike. You know, mountain bikes are really expensive. They're really personal. There's, you know, different setups you have. But being able to, like, especially with this new electronic sort of tech sphere that we see, people really love the fact that they can get in there and tailor their setup to really suit their riding, to enhance their riding. One thing we haven't talked too much about is the battery on the unit. Fox have got, created essentially their own proprietary battery here. Since the Neo shock range has come out, we've also seen the transfer dropper post.
Yep.
They both use the same battery, right?
Yeah.
And then interesting, Fox recommend or rate the rear shocks battery life to be up to 20 hours of trail riding between charges. So that's pretty impressive as well, wouldn't you say?
For something that's, opening and closing so regularly, that is a massive amount of ride time. Like you don't hear it opening and closing like you do with some other electronic suspension. It is actually very, very quiet from that aspect. But it's constantly doing its thing. Like initially when you first jump on it, you really feel when it is chopping and changing through its open and close. But once you get a bit of trail time, you can predict when it's going to be open and when it's going to be closed. And it's so active. So to the fact that you can get up to 20 hours of trail time out of it is pretty mind-boggling, to be honest, with how hard it's working.
Another thing, as I've done my research, and because I've spent a little bit of time riding this setup as well, the actual interesting thing about the rear shocks is once the battery's off them, or if you're not turning it on, so to speak, the actual rear shocks are very, very similar in terms of the layout and everything to the non-Neo live valve version. So that's going to help in a lot of ways, one, serviceability and whatnot as well. But interesting, when we talk about the battery, let's say out in the trail, you've forgotten to charge it up, are you going to be riding around with a fully locked out, dangerous bike?
No, so basically in its natural state, it will stay closed. But for example, if you can leave the battery out, or if the battery dies, it just becomes a normal coil shock.
So it reverts, its default goes back to being
reverts back to being open. So it'll basically, it'll just act like a coil shock. And let's say being the same battery as they use in the electronic seat post, if you've got the the full Neo setup, you can swap your battery out if you want to, or if your seat post dies, you can put your shock battery in, that kind of thing. So there's a bit of redundancy built into the whole ecosystem as well there, for sure.
Yeah, Fox have definitely really made some big steps forward with their electronic ecosystem, which we're really impressed to see. It's not really surprising considering how developed and advanced their regular suspension and seat posts are. But yeah, it's really interesting to see them invest more in this electronic system. So yeah, really impressive bit of kit right here. One, like we mentioned at the start, this is an aftermarket shock that you can put on pretty much any trail bike on the market. Jump onto Fox Factory's website, you'll see all the sizing of the float range and also the GHX Live Valve Neo. Yeah, really impressive. These are actually in Australia in dealers right now in good stock and availability. So if this is something you're kind of interested in looking at, go have a chat with your Fox Factory dealer and they'll tell you heaps more.